Come on, let's pick a random grave and see what we can find.
We headed to a part of the cemetery that we'd never been before, looking for a grave that stood out.
So we found one grave over the back of the cemetery, so let's have a look and see if we can read the writing. It's the grave of George Jude, who passed away in 1959. So I'm going to go home, research his life, and see what I can find.
George Jude was born on the 19th of January 1882 in Kings Lynn, Norfolk, to James Jude and Elizabeth Batterby. The family lived in Pleasant Row and his father worked as a waterman, an occupation George took up by the age of 11. In 1895, when George was 13, he was in trouble for garden robbing. P.C. Harrod saw him in Mr. Parsons' garden with another lad named Frost. They were throwing stones and taking apples and also causing damage to the flowers. They had also done this on previous occasions. Mr. Parsons said he had a driving whip and had sometimes followed the boys down the lane and whipped them about the legs, but that seemed to have no deterrent effect. Jude was remanded in custody. Also in 1895, he was in trouble for causing damage to a field alongside 7 other boys. Life was difficult for George. His mother had given birth to 18 children. 11 had died as infants, and 2 others died aged 11 and 15. On the 23rd of May 1904, he married Eleanor Agnes Rudd at St Nicholas Chapel, Kings Lynn. Eleanor was born in Kings Lynn in 1886 and also lived in the same area. I was sent these wonderful photos by the family.
The family set up home here in Kirby Street, which was demolished during the slum clearances. At the time, George was working as a lighterman.
They had a son Frederick in 1907 and a daughter Jessie in 1910. They were followed by Nellie in 1912 and Jean in 1919. Life would have been perfect, 3 girls and 1 boy and happily married. But tragedy struck the family in 1928. Jean was only 9 years old when she fell ill, and not long after she died of diphtheria. The disease was a massive killer of children. The bacteria which causes the illness produces a powerful toxin. It killed 1 out of 10 people who had it, and killed on average 3,500 children a year, up until a vaccine was produced in 1940. Sadly, Eleanor passed away just 5 months later. It was said she never recovered from the death of her daughter and died of a broken heart.
Eleanor was buried in this part of the cemetery. It's unknown if she ever had a headstone. You can only imagine how George would have felt losing his wife and daughter.
In 1928, he married Hannah Dabbs. Hannah had lost her husband in 1925 and had 4 children of her own. The family lived at 9 North End Yard, and in 1930 they had a son James. His son Frederick married in 1930 to Kate Maud Bunting. Jessie married Albert Denny in 1935. And Nellie married Arthur Paddy in 1939. Hannah passed away in October 1950, aged 66, leaving George a widower for a second time. George was interviewed by the local paper in 1953. He said he started work at the age of 11 with the East Coast Navigation Company. His father was in charge of one of the company's tugs, which piled the Fenland rivers and canals, towing barges carrying such varied cargoes as coal, timber and sugar, and he himself was the ship's boy. Later, the firm was bought by Summerfields and Thomas, and the old method of horses as a means of haulage reverted to. Mr. Jude was put in charge of one of these, but by the age of 30, he had decided that was not the life for him. He said, "I got fed up with the horses and felt I was not making enough money, so he began work on Lynn docks, unloading ships and working in the timber trade. It was much harder and more tiring work, but as he says, work never hurt me." And he stuck to it for 30 years. Then in 1939, he decided to go back to his old work again, joined the dredging construction company. He still enjoys his work and says the open-air life is one of the things that keeps him healthy and useful, along with good living. He does not travel on barges now, but is caretaker of the dredging barges lying in the docks. George passed away on the 29th of May 1959, aged 77. His funeral took place at St Nicholas Chapel, the same place he married. At the time, he was still living at 9 North End Yard. His obituary said he was a life member of the Transport and General Workers Union. He was also a member of the Lynn Independent Club for many years. George was a hard-working family man, and it was an honour to remember his life. Our final stop was to pay our respects, so rest in peace, George. you will be remembered.